Hello,
Good morning, Jacob.
good morning. Yes, so I see we are already being recorded. So are you going to adjust the recording after, or just turn it off for now and then on again?
For everyone, so that we can see it afterwards. Here are some practicalities. Feel free to connect your audio, to share some questions in the chat, but also to raise your hands and to engage in the conversation that we were going to have in the 6 issues that we're going to discuss. So yes, feel free to engage. This is the whole point of the webinar as well. For the next 2 hours, we want to have really nice conversations. Regarding a bit the agenda, we will first start with a SEMIC introduction for those that do not know us yet, but then we will go through the goals of the session with a brief overview of the DCAT AP reuse guidelines so that we're all aligned and on the same page. And then we're going to go on the issue walkthrough where we have 6 main issues we want to tackle today and get your feedback on. And then we hope to have some nice discussion as well in these issues. So I'll give the floor to Anastasia for the SEMIC introduction.
Hello, good morning all. I would also like to welcome you in this webinar. So I suppose, and having seen the participant list, I see that there are many familiar names. So I suppose you are all familiar with SEMIC. We are the semantic interoperability community under Interoperable Europe. So our objective is to support semantic interoperability, and towards this objective we are trying to align on semantic definitions, metadata and reference data sources, and we're trying to raise awareness in the community and support as much as we can all our stakeholders with their semantic interoperability needs. So what we are basically doing is that we are dealing with a set of semantic assets, either core vocabularies or application profiles. We can move to the next slide. The application profiles are basically application profiles of DCAT. DCAT AP, it's the European application profile of DCAT, and based on this we have different flavors such as DCAT AP for base registries, the geospatial GeoDCAT AP, for statistical datasets StatDCAT AP, for the high value datasets HVD DCAT AP, and the recently introduced machine learning DCAT AP, which is also tackling the AI Act. Other application profiles that that exist in the SEMIC inventory, it's the ADMS AP and also the CPSV AP. No need to get more into the details. You are probably all aware of it. So you know that DCAT AP, it's an application profile. We can move to the next slide. It's an application profile of DCAT and is aiming to facilitate the discovery of data sets that share common metadata. So there are different domains of applications like open data portals, base registries, data spaces, the machine learning community. No need to get into these details, but what I need to mention is that DCAT AP, it's the first interoperable Europe solution. It was endorsed by the Interoperable Europe Board, and it got the label of as the first interoperable Europe solution, which means that it's a highly reusable solution that matches the board needs, which is user centricity, reusability, security and data privacy, openness and sustainability. And it's endorsed and proposed for building better interoperable digital public services. So I would like now to give the floor to my colleague Bert to get into the data spaces needs and how the DCAT AP can support, and why we are here today in this webinar trying to identify what are the right ways to extend the DCAT AP for the needs of data spaces. So Bert, please.
So as Natasha already said, the DCAT AP has been acknowledged as and labeled as Interoperable Europe solution. And that activity of that motivation as well has to do with the global ambition that we have with DCAT AP is to be collections of data users, data users connected to each other. And one of those ecosystems are the data spaces. And so the data spaces are a group of collaborators that participants together that are going to share data. And in that, if you want to do that correctly, you need to express what is the metadata, what are the data sets available for your participants. And if you take an outer look to it, then you would like to have that those data spaces, those ecosystems actually can as well enforce each other, strengthen each other, and so actually start to reuse the data sets that are available within one data space to another data space. And in this context, has the Data Act, which is the legal foundation for the data spaces, set out and harmonized a request for harmonized standards. And in that's one part into it is a request to have a metadata specification for the data sets, the data products, as they call them in the context of data spaces, to be how to share that, how to document so that they can be easily be shared. This activity has been taken up by the standardization organization ETSI, and you see the reference over there, which is currently in public review. And in there, the standard, the ETSI proposal is as following, is that data spaces, when you develop that, that they shall adopt a catalog metadata data model. That's the goal. And so this is the generic case, and that this is preferably based on DCAT AP. So the idea is that you start from DCAT AP, you start to use it in your data space, and if needed for your needs, for your use cases coming from data space needs, then you create an extension. If you would consider that because of the technology choices and that in the data space you would use another metadata standard, which is still fine, and this is allowed by the ETSI standard, then the obligation or the intention is to make a mapping to the DCAT AP. And this all with the setting to make the data sets that you write and exchange within a data space as well available and exchangeable and interoperable with outer and other data spaces. And there you see that in order to do that, so certainly for that first to second part, there we need guidelines to write about those the new profiles. Now, this is part stimulating from this legal activity, and that coincides with, Oscar, the next slide, with our current activities in our ecosystem, that we actually do this practice already. So this is the current, and as Natasha already elaborated, within SEMIC, we maintain a number of those profiles extensions, but as well, outside our control. All the member states do this so that they try to build nice and good profiles together. And this how to build and how to do this, and our community, those who are a long time involved, roughly know how to do it. We try to agree to make that nicely fitting to it. That's one part of it. That's good for our community. But we would like now to share and to bring this knowledge together in the reuse guidelines, so that new players on the block, and like in the context of data spaces, can easily do this and more easily do this and follow and integrate with the whole ecosystem that we have established along the long years that we are collaborating. So if we go to the next slide, what are the current DCAT AP reuse guidelines? So this is a document that is consisting of 2 parts. The first part in section 4, that is the most general stepwise profile. And so we try to be, with these guidelines, be helpful in kind of a stepwise process and tension towards creating a DCAT AP extension or profile. We use that interchangeable here. Where you see as a first step familiars with DCAT AP. That's the same as what we see with in ETSI standards. We have a similar element into it, the first step. Then if you have identified that DCAT AP is not sufficient, then you look to your use cases and you try to formulate the reasons why you would go beyond that and how to do that. And then essentially in that process, you involve the stakeholders in order to create the profile. And at the end, and when you iterate over all your use cases and together with your stakeholders, and you have got sufficient adoption, you're going to publish this profile and this extension. So this is the general process. We have asked feedback on that, and actually what we see is that most of the feedback will be, and it will be the topics of our discussion today, are in section 5, the more detailed steps and elements into it. So because this high level general process, that is nice, but we see that in making an individual choice in an individual use case, there are typical patterns, and we try to express in section 5 the kind of typical patterns and guide towards a choice, let's say a common denominator choice into it. So this is the objective of today, to look at a number of the comments that we got. So thank you for everyone who did the effort to give feedback. That's all you can say. And I give the floor to Oscar to deep dive a bit into the number of issues and the kind of how we have split it and organized them before we deep dive into the number of selected topics we want to discuss with you today.
Yes, thank you, Bert, and thank you, Anastasia, for the introduction as well. Indeed, so currently there are 30 issues, and they have been all labeled as well. And just to give a brief overview of what these labels mean, well, it's this slide. So you can see that there's a question answer status, there's feedback requested, so that means that we want more community input on this feedback request to be able to maybe include it in our next reuse guidelines. And then we're going to try and with the SEMIC community continue to propose resolutions, to propose solutions, and for that currently there's issue number 12 that has a resolution that has been proposed in the issue itself. We have also categorized some as future work, so which are maybe for more longer term horizon. And then the 3 main labels that we use a lot are the editorial fixes. So when there are some editorial changes that we need to fix to clarify in the existing text, if we need to change certain things. So these will be labeled as editorial. there's some improvement. So this is really to strengthen, to improve on the current guidelines, on how they are structured, the message. We just want to improve it. So this will be an improvement label. And then finally, a feature label, which is maybe quite an important one as well, is where we want to have new capabilities and really new part of the specification that are not yet explored currently. And so currently you can see that there are 30 issues, and today we're going to cover 6 of them. So we have decided to cover these 6 issues because they are mature. There's a potential for resolution as well with the community today, or at least an interesting conversation so that we can move forward. Some issues are not yet mature enough to bring to the webinar, so that is why we have not brought them today. And others also quite related to style guide discussion. So this we will try to provide a detailed answer as well in the issues at a later stage. So that is a brief overview of the issues. We will cover 6 of them. So issue 7, issue 24, 25, 26, 29, and 30. So that is the agenda for today. And I think we can move on to the first issue that Jacob will present us.
Before we go to the first issue, I don't know if the audience has some generic comments on the guidelines so far and so on. I just want to capture on the process here and so on, if there's anything. I see Michel.
Yes, Michel Savage from Airbus, and I'm new in the landscape of DCAT, so maybe I would say something stupid. Sorry in advance for that. I didn't catch exactly why we need to extend DCAT and not to, I would say, move this need of extension in the vocabulary. So maybe I don't understand the rationale of the extension of DCAT and how that fits with the notion of vocabularies. That could be also a nice way to support the extension. But maybe my question is stupid because I'm quite new in the picture.
Not at all. So what we have here is a complex, first of all, kind of a complex network of specifications. Meaning we start from the basis, which is DCAT, which is itself a vocabulary plus a mini application profile that guides you to certain constraints. Based on that, we have a European one, which is DCAT AP, which sets for the European context on it. And then we have a number of either sectorial, either legal, context, either member state context. So it's kind of a combination of all kinds of profiles together. So this is what is the current situation. In that, everyone somehow we have written already some guidelines how you conform to if you create your own profile to it. If you deep dive into the text, you can find some hints and snippets about it. How do you do that? What are the steps and how the things can be related to each other? How those arrows that trickle down here on the picture, how they are related and what is the impact and what is the steps to take. But if you're new to it, like you in your case, then it's I can understand and we experience that it's maybe helpful to start from a kind of a guideline and have some basic instructions in the way how we resolve and how we look to this ecosystem in the specifications, why we take this property, why we don't take this property, how far we go, and what are the choices to make into it. What are the motivations of, let's say, coherent modeling? So this is the storytelling into that. Does this already give you a bit of direction why this is needed? Of course, we rely here in the past a lot on the experience of the people within data modeling and semantic data modeling, and to take that into account. So that is as well an element that is underlying in the community, but somehow it needs sometimes to clarify what are the choices we are going to make in our ecosystem. even with all the experience we have aligned, there are many options possible. So there's a bit of guidance so that things that influence on each other is kind of transparent and predictable. So it's and to know where to resolve certain issues as well, because that's not always easy neither.
Okay, thank you so much.
I don't know if any other would like to have a first generic question. If not, then I'll pass the floor to Jacob.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I'll try to guide you through the issues that we have selected for the discussion in this webinar. And some of those issues, or basically all of those issues, are quite detailed in the way that in the guidelines, we are already focusing in the section 5 on details of the individual steps that guide us through creation of a new profile. And these steps, of course, since they are detailed, they have some sub-steps and so on. And then there can be some issues with specific wording of the sub-steps and unclarity in what is meant by those, especially for newcomers, but also for established experts in the field. So the goal here is to come to, or at least discuss some of these issues to get the opinion of the community. We don't expect any particular resolution in general, with the exception of this issue, which is kind of a warm-up issue. It is quite detailed, but then the resolution is basically voting on one of 3 options. So that's to get us started. And first, let me explain the situation of this issue. So we are in a situation where we want to create a new DCAT AP profile. We have a use case where we want to use a property that is well defined in a DCAT AP, and the definition and the label of the property fits our use case. We want to reuse that property in our profile. But there is an issue. In DCAT AP, connected to this property is a controlled vocabulary. So the property can take only values that are prescribed by this controlled vocabulary. And the issue is that for our new profile, this controlled vocabulary is not fit for purpose. So there is something missing in the profile. We want to add some more items. In the controlled vocabulary, we want to add some more items to this controlled vocabulary, but we cannot do that. If we could do that, we are in another sub-step of this process. So we cannot do that for some reason. It is out of our control. And at the same time, in DCAT AP, it's specified that this property that we want to reuse must use this controlled vocabulary that we cannot extend, but we know that we want to use or have additional items in that vocabulary. So what do we do in a situation like this? So if we are not in control of the vocabulary, there is no chance of adding items to that vocabulary, which might be the case for other cases, but not here. Then we also cannot reuse the property, even though we really like it and we would reuse it otherwise. So then the only choice is that we create a separate property in our new profile. We create a separate controlled vocabulary with all the items that we want to use. We connect that controlled vocabulary to that property. And maybe we can also establish a mapping between items from our new controlled vocabulary to the original one. And also, since our controlled vocabulary is an extension of the original one, we can also provide the mapping for the original property and to the original controlled vocabulary where suitable. So that's the situation. And the issue that we face here is with the example that illustrates this situation. So the example, we took the DCAT AP for high-value data sets. There we have a new property for connecting a high-value data set category to a data set. So there is a new property connected to a new controlled vocabulary. And in this situation, we argued that we could not reuse the original DCAT AP theme property because it had the must requirement and it was connected to the data theme vocabulary. So it kind of illustrated the situation where we had a property that we would reuse, but we cannot do that because we cannot extend the original vocabulary of themes, and it is a must requirement in DCAT AP. So we created a new property, connected it to our new code list, and we could then also establish the mapping. Okay, so that's the whole situation, including the example, and now the issue with this. The issue is the issue raised by you, the community, that actually in DCAT AP, the DCAT theme property is listed in the section where it says that the values of this property need to have at least one value from the controlled vocabulary. There is no must. So it is a bad example. And this is true, but there is a little bit of a historic context to this, because this guideline was created when DCAT AP 3.0.0 was in effect, and there the qualification of the property and the usage of the code list was really must. So that was the case. But it was viewed as too restrictive, and that's why in DCAT AP 3.01 we have lifted it to the at least one qualification, which of course broke the example because the example kind of was fixed. So now the reusers will not get into this situation for the themes. But then what to do with this example? And here we get to the voting part. So we have three options of how to make this situation clearer so that there is no issue with the versions and so on. So the first possibility is better no example than a confusing one. So the action would be remove the example. It is a possibility. The second possibility is to go further with the example and explain what I just explained. So explain the history behind this example and the evolution from DCAT AP 3.0.0 to 3.01, and the must and at least one qualification, and explain how it is that it is no longer valid example, but it was valid in the past, which also shows a little bit of the reasoning of the evolution of things we have in our DCAT AP profiles hierarchy. But the risk here is that it will be too complex and too confusing. And then the third option is to create a hypothetical example. So we create a fake situation that fits this situation that we have described, that we know that sometimes happens. For instance, and we had this proposition already from Matthias Palmer in the issue, we could use the ADMS status property with an item that we want to add to that controlled vocabulary, which in theory we could add, but we would say, no, we cannot do that, what to do, and illustrate it with a clearer but hypothetical example. So now, please use the chat to express your preference, how you would see this issue best resolved. So would it be better to just remove the example because the situation is kind of self-explanatory? Would it be better to actually dig a little bit deeper and explain the historic elements to this situation? Or would it be better to just create a hypothetical example that would be just crystal clear? So please, the votes are already coming in. We have 3, so create a hypothetical example. Matthias as well, thank you. Yeah, so Matthias has a good comment that this also shows what it means when in a new profile we use the must qualification with the controlled vocabulary, that we basically block reuse of that property for all sub-profiles, and also in combination of profiles. So as we have seen the hierarchy of application profiles that are already there, there can be a situation where one metadata record needs to be compliant to multiple profiles, for instance, a national one and a geospatial one. And there, when we have this must qualification on a code list, it may create an impossible situation where one property cannot comply with two exclusive controlled vocabularies. So that might be a problem. Okay, so now it seems that option 3 is in the lead. There are some votes for 1 or 2. And it seems that that was it for the voting. So yeah, as I said, this was kind of a warm-up issue. So the resolution here seems to be we'll create a clearer but hypothetical example that actually is not happening, but could happen in theory, and what to do. Okay, so with this, we are done with the warm-up issue, and let's get to some real issue that hopefully will spark up a bigger discussion. So this issue is, I think, Matthias's favorite. So yeah, subclassing as a modeling pattern should be reconsidered. So what is the problem here? So it already happens in some of the profiles that, for instance, we want to have a different set of mandatory properties for a certain class, let's say distribution, depending on what it actually represents. So it may be that the distribution represents a downloadable file. Then we want to say, okay, then it has to have a media type and a format and a download URL. But the distribution may also represent, for instance, a service. Then we want to say where is the access point of that service. And somehow in the specification, we want to distinguish these two cases and have a different set of mandatory properties for one and a different set of mandatory properties for the second one. So currently, what may happen is that we need to explain this in usage nodes. In the usage nodes, we'll see a lot of repeated sentences like, if the distribution represents a data service, then use this. If the distribution represents a downloadable file, this is not mandatory, but otherwise it is, and so on. So it is a lot of unclarity. So the question is what to do with situations like these. If we follow the current guidelines, this would mean creating two subclasses of distribution. For instance, a file distribution, subclass of distribution, a service distribution, subclass of distribution, which means creating new IRIs for those classes. And then in the data, we would have, this is a file distribution, RDF type is my file distribution, and we would have to do some reasoning to know that, in fact, due to the subclass of relationship, this is also a DCAT distribution, which might be considered costly, let's say, or inconvenient. There is another way, and that is that we would introduce a new modeling concept, let's say, something we can call a profile, a class profile in the case of a class. We would say, okay, so we do have these two situations in the specification. We have a file distribution and a service distribution. We will somehow separate those descriptions into, let's say, two sections in the human readable documentation, explain what is mandatory for each. But we would say that in the data, these are still instances of DCAT distribution, but we can at least identify those two subcases, generate validating Shekel shapes for those. The question is how exactly, yeah, let's focus just on the difference here that we actually create two subclasses versus we have two reuse contexts. So this relates to the section 572.3 of the reuse guidelines, issue number 29. And with this, first I would like to ask Bert if you have some additional comments on it, or Matthias, and then we can open the discussion.
Okay, so here On my perspective, to a certain extent, this is as well a more generic discussion because it leads to not only to DCAT AP, but in DCAT AP it would occur. Yeah? More often, that's a way of doing. So there's such a problem. I think we need to be able to identify the case. So in both cases, that's important that this really is able to do, that we identify what is the file distribution and what is the service distribution case, that this is be cleared. So this is always, I think it needs to be expressed. The second part of it is that we have to align and to see how this as well maybe has impact with the relationship with DCAT, where there's as well a statement set starting from DCAT resource. If you have a particular use case that is not fitting perfectly, then create a subclass. So there's as well a similar statement in DCAT. So in this way, as such, but in both cases, I think the end result is, in my opinion, that we describe this kind of class profile and say, okay, in the context of the file, the distribution as a file, we want to have these constraints available. And I would like by default normally use the main class type DCAT distribution. So this is the intent to be used. So this is the goal to be realized. I think, in my opinion, personally, I think this is the common practice, or the ideal practice. How to reach that, how to get to that, that's the question.
Okay, thanks, Matthias.
Well, I think I agree with everything Bert said. I also lean, as you know, towards the class profiles approach. If we call it that or entity profiles or something, I don't really care that much, but I think it goes in the direction of what application profiles is and the purpose of reusing classes and properties. You should not introduce additional classes unless you really have to, as it introduces a new burden for the consumer. Yeah, and in the context of the European data portal, for instance, if we have all member states starting to create a lot of subclasses of data set and distribution to provide this, national view on what the data set is, we are going to have some problems. If we do that, we will have to provide good guidance to double type to make sure that we don't push the burden to someone else to do the entailment, to calculate all the subclass relationships, because otherwise you have to rely on lookup of schemas to understand how the classes relate. So I think this has connections to how you do modeling in OWL and the closed world example, or closed world scenarios, and the open world scenarios. And since we are in the linked data world, which is an open scenario, I think we need to follow through and be consistent and avoid subclassing when we don't really need to. So option 2 here.
Okay, thanks, Matthias. And now it is a chance for the community to also weigh in on this. So the discussion is open. We have a vote for 2. Thank you.
Maybe here to add to the suggestion that Matthias made, would it be of interest that we add let's say that the materialization of the double typing is a kind of a recommended or an advised practice when this is needed, because that's the question, how far we go into that. But that would be maybe addressing to a certain extent let's say, mitigate certain concerns.
Yes, it would, but I would say that we would need to take that path if we go with option 1. Then we would have to guide. I've seen multiple implementations also where developers that are not so familiar with RDF, for instance, just find one RDF type and ignore the rest. So even double typing would sometimes, but maybe we shouldn't consider those obvious bugs. But the checking is still complex there as well. So we in both cases we have complex scenarios for verifying that something abides to a certain set of constraints that you have. So maybe that is also an important aspect of this, that when you validate something, you don't have access to the class of a very specific kind of distribution. You don't know which validation or the context, usage context to refer to. So, and I think that is contextual information that whatever scenario you have, that, okay, in the European data portal, we will always just validate against the base profile, and that's enough.
Exactly. So these are kind of contextual information, how you share this extra contextual information that you have followed more detailed rules versus the expectation that those detailed rules must be transferred or interpretable by somebody else.
Okay, so far we have 4 votes for option 2, 2 votes for option 1. Maybe I can also comment a little bit on the possibilities of validation using Shackle. I think you already touched upon it, Matthias, but in the situation 2, where we actually have 2 profiles of DK distribution, we can, of course, create 2 sets of Shackle shapes, but if we take a look at the node shapes, they would both target the class DK distribution. And then it could be problematic to actually have 2 sets of Shackle shapes, both targeting DK distribution, because then they would both apply, and still we won't get the validation that we need without the subclass.
I think that depends on how you read or how you use Shackle. Shackle has the concept of, let's see now, focus nodes. And you get the focus node for a target shape either by using the target class or the target constructions, where you automatically calculate the focus nodes to evaluate against. But the Shackle specification also specifies that this is just one mechanism. You are allowed to provide the focus node based on some other mechanism to the Shackle shapes to be validated. Of course, this just means that it is outside of the scope of the Shackle validation process. For a European data portal, you would know which Shackle shapes which you consider are the entry points. Always validate against the base dataset profile, not the member of data series profile, for instance, as a basis. And then you could calculate all those based on in series property, and then you know, oh, for these data sets that are actually in a series, then we have this mechanism. And I'm not sure about this, but there are probably more complicated ways of doing things based on Sparkle in Shackle that you can use. But now someone has to correct me. Maybe there is a way of doing more complicated targeting based on Shackle, on Sparkle inside of Shackle as well.
I see that Maria has raised her hand. I would give her first floor.
Yeah, in the meantime, it's been partially answered already. I already had voted for 1 because that is conceptually cleaner on the way what really is happening with the distribution. and that you don't have profiles, but you have 2 subclasses because you have 2 different kinds of distribution. That was already my reason for choosing the first option. The other question that I had was basically about the shackle shapes, and Jakub already basically answered that already. That is basically another reason to choose option 1, because the option 2 with the shackle shapes, it sounds a bit hacky, workaroundy, with a profile that it doesn't by default, by the standard, doesn't recognize that kind of notion, whereas that is clear and transparent with option 1. So I would also say, with respect to the shackle validations, if you use that route, that option 1 would be clearer than option 2 as an additional motivation for option 1. I know when I looked at the chat, there were more for option 2, but I would actually say maybe you want to reconsider that in the light of what was just explained with respect to the shackle, that it actually leans more to a cleaner option for option 1. My contribution there. And obviously also, if you want to use it and translate your DCAT AP to, say, an ontology or an OWL, even if it's not an ontology, but conceptual model formalized an OWL, you get your cleaner reasoning for that. You can link it to ontology-based data access and other aspects as well, which you would not have with this notion of class profiles. So I'll leave it at that as a motivation for choosing for option 1. But I saw more people putting up the hand up, so maybe they want to say more in favor of option 2.
Okay, thank you. There was in the chat an ask for an example of a class profile that already exists. So as we explained, the current guideline and the profiles, they do not use this at the moment. There is an indication that it could be used, for instance, for the distribution that we see the example here. And it was almost used in the past for a dataset in a dataset series, which was up for discussion for DCAT AP 3, and in the end didn't make it into the final specification, so we kind of didn't have to deal with it. But it was basically a subsection specific to datasets in dataset series with specific definitions, what it means for a dataset in a dataset series to what properties does it need to have, and so on. So that would be another example.
Just the one element I would like to add to this, and this is where the balance, and we have to avoid that. We are going to introduce another property like a type, official type, and then to put in file distribution into it in order to facilitate the reasoning on it, because then you have 2 ways to express the subclassing into it. So this is just as an because then we would create not types or something like this, or categories that are meaningful for the sharing to the public, but meaningful for the validation purposes. So we just on the identification of the subclass or the name of it. So just add that as a note. I would try to avoid the introduction of technical code lists just for the reason of validation. Yes, Yunda? Yeah.
Sorry. Hi. So I was wondering, so what we're talking about here, like the enabling subclassing or not, it is targeted at DCAT AP, right? So whether we go for the subclassing or the subprofiling route, what I'm wondering, curious, is that so if I'm trying to extend from DCAT AP to create another profile, doesn't it like automatically solve like the sub-profiling way? Just in my use case, I can imagine that the needs for a subclass. So I'm wondering like if the sub-profiling is just should be there anyway. when I try to extend DCAT AP.
Okay, so one thing would be the scope of the profile. So for instance, we have DCAT AP as the base profile, and then we have DCAT AP HVD for high-value datasets as a separate document. In that separate document, we also have the class dataset, and it is reuse of that class as it is described in DCAT AP. But since this is a specific or separate document, we also say, okay, so this dataset in scope of this document is treated as the high-value dataset, and therefore we have some expectations on top of the regular DCAT AP dataset. But because this is in a separate document, it kind of seems a bit more natural, let's say. But now the thing is that since we already do this in separate documents, can we do that in one document where we have two reuse contexts of the same thing in one document? That's kind of the difference.
I see. So basically, in my use case specifically, it doesn't really matter what I vote here then. I see. Thank you.
Okay. And Matthias?
I think this is a very good point, and also points in the direction that it is natural to have class profiles because we already have them. We already have them inside of an application profile. We have a class profile. It's just that it's the singular one, and we don't have to talk about it explicitly because it's the only class profile in of a data set in that application profile. I think we need a better terminology for this because we have the same thing for properties. We have the same Dublin Core title appearing multiple times within one application profile on both the dataset, distribution, catalog, data service, etc. And each appearance of that property is probably a property profile since it's attached then to a specific class profile. We currently don't have that much of a good way of talking about it. We have the need right now in Sweden to be able to hyperlink into an application profile web document with a specific property. Where would you end up? Where in that document would you show that Dublin Core title actually appears? Well, we can't point to the dataset appearance of the title or the data service appearance of the title. There are multiple places where the title appears. Therefore, we are thinking of providing kind of a reference at the bottom, like an appendix, where you can see this title appears, and then it's like link, 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 each corresponding to typically property shapes. If we talk this about Shackle, the places where they are reused. And the same goes for the classes. For most classes, it will be a single link up into the document. The distribution class goes to the single place where we have distribution. But in that reference, you could have multiple references saying like dataset goes to the, or let's say distribution, like in this case we have in front of us. If you link to this document with the distribution class as target, you will get to that reference section and you see that, oh, the distribution class is both on the class profile for file distribution and service distribution. And I think this is it's about consistency and good terminology and not locking ourselves in for the future when we work with application profiles. That's my strongest argument. And also that it has been used already quite a lot. I mean, Fresnel had it, Dublin Core description set profiles had it. We've had it we have it in Inspec now. And there are many places that you basically have had this concept, but we have had it with many different names, and it would be nice to standardize it or agree on a terminology. Sorry, I'm rambling about this. I care deeply about this one.
Okay, Maria.
Yeah, I would like to have a clarification there. There is a difference between reusing a property which is properly reused in different places, then you have not a profile of a property. And refining the properties of a class, because then you get subclasses. So I would not put them in the same basket as if they were both profiles. You don't do the exact same thing. If you were to refine the property, then you would get a sub-property. But in this case, if you use, for instance, reuse whatever, the DC title, whatever you were saying there, if you use it at the different places, that is literally reuse. We have a term for that, and you use the term for that as well. Then you don't need to introduce the term profile as a new modeling concept. Likewise, for the subclassing, if you have different properties or properties that are more constrained, logically, technically, it's a subclass. It's not a profile. So then you actually are, in a way, contradicting yourself, or you're conflating two different things. As if they were the same example, they are not both profiles. You actually do different things. One is literally reuse. The other one is a notion of refinement.
May I answer?
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say.
You know, last time we spoke about this, Maria, we went on for 3 hours or something like that. So, but the concept of application profiles has been around since the 90s, and the idea of refinement has been there to restrict the usage of a property in a certain sense. Whether that conceptually, or I don't know, corresponds to that you are actually doing a sub-property, I don't know. In practice, we don't. We reuse it directly to further interoperability. That's the tradition in Dublin Core. And that there is a distinction between properties and classes from this perspective, I don't see that. There have been many application profiles of where you have refined the usage of a class and you have refined the usage of properties without introducing new URIs, basically, or subclasses or subproperties. So yeah, it has been used like that, and we are using it like that across profiles. The only difference is that now we want to do it within a profile.
Okay, so anyone else wants to join the discussion now? Okay, so as I said, not every issue can be resolved in the webinar. And you can all see that this particular issue is really, really interesting, really impactful. And there are voices in both directions. To sum up the voting in the chat, there seems to be more twos than ones, but it is not like unanimous. So I would say, please go to this issue and have your voice there, because this is an impactful issue that could impact how the specifications are being created and reused and combined and validated and so on. And with this, we move to a 5-minute break, and we'll see you here at 11:08 for the other issues that we have prepared. Okay, welcome back from the break, and let's continue with more issues that we have prepared. Okay, so now we are at issue number 30 on GitHub, which is that there are some situations where we need to link to an external resource. For instance, we may have a data set that conforms to a standard. Now, the standard here might be an external resource. It will have its own IRI, and we want to say in our specification that the data set links to a standard. You can see that on the right-hand side. So on the top, we have a focus on a data set with the conforms to property. The range is a standard. And yeah, but we are in the context of DCAT AP, so we are focused on dataset metadata. This is a link to a standard. DCAT AP is currently not focusing on what should be said about that standard, because that is out of scope currently. But there are options. For instance, in DCAT AP, standard looks like what we can see in the slide. And it says, okay, so a standard has a creation date, a description, an identifier, and so on as optional properties. In DCAT AP, you will see basically an empty section saying, okay, DCAT AP is not concerned with what data is there about the standard. So that is one part of the problem. But in any case, even if there is a description expected or not, an orthogonal problem is whether it is expected that there will be just a link, as in the first part of the example. So there will be, in this case, a data service that conforms to a standard. That standard will be identified by an IRI, and that's it. Or is the expectation that there will be also some data included about that standard in the metadata record of DCAT AP, DCAT AP, directly in the description of the dataset or data service, such as in the second part or the example as a whole, where we have a data service conforms to a standard, and then the standard is described in the same file as the rest of the metadata. So these are two options or two ways of looking at things, whether it is just a link and then it is expected that users follow that link, dereference it, and get some description, or whether the expectation is that applications will expect description of this resource in the same file where we link to that resource. So that's the difference of by reference versus by description. And now there is no support in the specifications to indicate which is the case. Regardless of what is the expectation on the description, whether we expect some properties or expectations expressed, but still we can see the two options. Do we expect just a link and the dereference, or do we expect that this resource will be described more in the same file? So that's basically the issue here. And the question here is, okay, we have these two situations. Do we support differentiating between those two directly in the specification? So do we want to say, okay, for standard, we expect just a link and dereference behavior, and for something else, we expect the description to be in the same file. So that's kind of the discussion here. And with that, again, I open the discussion. But before that, are there any specific comments by Bert or Matthias? Matthias has a hand raised.
Sorry, I forgot to take it down, but yeah, I think this is something we should express inside of an application profile to clarify. There is already a separation between main and supportive entities. Maybe we could have a third, would be the referenced entities.
So in this indeed, the question could be as well, should we somehow, let's say, make a labeling or, and let's say, a documentation effort towards this expectation? So this is a bit of the part of it. And how should that look like? So this is a bit of the kind of the question behind. And we see that implementers, and this is mostly, we have left this mostly to the implementers to make the choice, that there's often kind of a request towards the standard, the profile writers. What do you want, dear profile writers, from the implementers out? What is the choice to make? And it's not always clear in the whole expectation to be to set, and how this can be then trickled down, because then we enter into the network of the profiles, and then you might have different expectations at different levels of the data exchange, and in that case it becomes very challenging. So this is the I think here the request as well. Is there a need? Do you find, as Matthias expressed it, the need that we should try to make this more explicit at the specification level and to formulate this, label this in a nice way?
Maybe I can give one more example of the effect that it could have. In the past, when investigating how DCAT AP records were harvested by the European Data Portal, we also found a case, I think, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the case of the Norwegian Data Portal, where when there was a data set linked to a data service, when the dataset IRI was dereferenced, there was a link to the data service, but no description of the data service. And then to get the description, one would have to dereference the IRI of the data service, and they would get the description of the data service. The effect was that in the European Data Portal, only the dataset with the link to the data service was provided and harvested, but not the description of the service, because application-wise, this would require an additional step, dereferencing this particular link to get more data. And this problem could be manifested with basically any link. So someone has to do the decision, which links to dereference, which do not. And now there is no support for that in the specification.
There is even one more complicating factor, and that is in some cases you may want to allow both cases. You may want to point to a blank node, typing it as a standard and providing information about the standard, because the standard doesn't have a well-defined URI. And then you have to include it by description in your document, so to speak. While in other cases, you want to point to external standards that have well-defined URIs, like Creative Commons. And providing the exact same description of Creative Commons all over again, all the time, is just irritating and error-prone. Someone that receives the information may have to make a decision which title to use. So, yeah, so indicating that blank nodes are always by description. That is on the rules of RDF. You cannot have references of blank nodes outside of named graphs. In that way, they will break. That would be one approach, to say whenever you have by reference, it has to be URIs. If it is by description, use blank nodes. But in both cases, providing a set of properties to use for that class or entity. It's just that it's under a certain section in the application profile, saying here we have the, well, hopefully by references, but if you have them in line by description, it should be blank nodes.
So that would basically prohibit what we have in the slide, where we have a standard with an IRI, and then it is also described in the same file, right?
Yes, that would be an not allowed approach. If you like that approach, I'm not sure. I just need to find. I think we need to find a good path forward here to indicate this. I've had this problem with vcard kind, for instance, where you didn't prove. Oh, okay. DCAT AP 1.0 didn't have any properties for that one. I'm not sure if we still have any properties for it. Maybe something. No. It's very open. That means it's no way of describing by description right now. You have no guidance. And including that would then also kind of say, don't use an external reference. So I don't think we need to leave this to the implementers in that unclear way that we do today.
Okay, thank you. Any opinions on this issue?
Any need from the audience for this guidance? So at least we feel it. So with the feedback, with the examples, we see it. But just a question if the audience have experienced this as well. Of course, Jim confirmed Jacob's example. If not, then I propose to move on, Jacob, so people to have interest into this. I think, though, we still might have to think over this. This might go in the future. Let's say, what is kind of the labeling, the structuring work towards to make this more clear?
Okay, yeah, there is also one more piece of evidence of encountering this issue. So yeah, please discuss in GitHub, ideally, if you can provide an example where this was also an issue for you, that would be great. And for now, let's move on to the next issue. Okay, so now we are discussing issue number 25, structured diff between a profile and its base profile. So this is again Matthias's issue. And the question is, well, now in the guidelines, we say that authors of new DCAT AP profiles should explain how their profile is distinct or different from DCAT AP. But that's it. We do not say how. And the issue here for Matthias was that he would like something more structured, but it's not entirely clear what that structure should be. And Matthias, feel free to explain it a bit more, or if you want to just get the feeling from the community, what they feel about this. The question is, what would you expect as a reader from such a structured diff between the profile and the base profile?
So my thinking was that if we move towards shackle for expressing the class profiles, and even referring between shackle shapes, clearly saying that this is based on or refines this shackle shape, we have the option to, in a machine way, compare the two and provide diffs. I was going in towards that, hoping that we could, but that requires a machine representation of what we see in the application profile rather than just an HTML document. And I know it is generated in many cases from working with Enterprise Architect and various conversions. Yeah, I think we should move towards shackle for this.
Okay, maybe I can comment on what we have now. So now we have basically a free text section where the editors can say what's new with the profile. So that's really free text, not machine processable. then at least in the newer SEMIC specifications for each property, we have the link to the reused property and whether it is, according to the style guide, a reuse as is with terminological changes, or whether it is a new thing in the profile. So in those tables of properties, you can see this reuse column. So there, basically, what is marked as E and P is what is different and new, but again, not machine processable.
I think that when this was introduced, this was a very good step forward. And I think when I wrote this, this was more of a forward-looking issue. Where would we like to be in the future? Not necessarily something we can address at this moment in time, because we don't have well agreed on ways of expressing an application profile in machine processable way. But when we aim for that, we should aim for supporting this scenario.
I think this is indeed a very good point. That we take that into account and we don't lose this ambition. That's fine. I just see as well the feedback from Bart Hansens. So maybe also why something is deviating. That is an element indeed that's very important. That's I think here. The question is, do we already give, even with the change logs that we create, with the introduction, the general introduction of the profile, and that we expect to have each profile, with the reuse column that Jakob just illustrated, is that sufficient to capture the why, or are they as well additional needs? And just asking Bart, maybe, do you feel this is sufficient, or do we need to, strengthen this even more? Okay, from the chat, it's strengthening it even more. Yeah. So okay, that's not let's say a firm resolution, but let's say an attention point to write, to add this to the text.
Yeah, one possibility would be that whenever we have a new thing in a profile, or the changed a little bit reuse, we could make it mandatory to have a usage note with a little bit of explanation. So that would be like a light approach to this.
Okay, that is good. So I think this is good feedback. So we have one, future use of the structured diff, and then the machine readable make to ensure that the profiles are getting interconnected at the machine readable level. And one is that we should into the reply of the motivational aspect of the change, to make the recommendation more visible that this motivation is intrinsic part of the profile. Okay. Okay, good. Let's take that as a resolution for 25. I think here we have a nice clarification, and we can continue.
Okay, so this is another documentation improvement issue. So in our current application profiles, we have the lists of reused classes and properties, and we have the expected ranges and domains and cardinalities and controlled vocabularies, which can be then basically validated by a machine, a shackle shape or something like that. But typically in an application profile, we also have some reuse guidelines, usage guidelines, software recommendations like these, like how to pick the correct keywords, when to use publisher or creator, and so on. And these are, again, not machine readable, not machine identifiable at the moment. And the proposal here is, and also these are part of the document, which is released at some point in time. And then if we want to change anything, we basically need to create a new draft and a new release. And then there is, again, no like machine readable connection between the two releases. So the proposal here is to be more flexible, which means two things. Have a set of at least identifiable but machine actionable, let's say, pieces of text recommendations that could link to parts of the specification and could be displayed there and maybe have a different life cycle than the release of the application profile itself. So it would make the environment a little bit more dynamic. And by making them machine identifiable in some way, we could do a script or something like that that would, for instance, as in the illustration, add existing recommendations to classes or properties in the specification with a link to where it is defined or something like that. So it's a request, again, for a basically machine actionable software recommendations with a different life cycle included in the profiles. So again, maybe Matthias, you want to comment on that?
Maybe just that this is based on, well, we needed this. There were a lot of questions regarding various aspects of the recommendation and of the specification, and we couldn't make sure that we have everything written in time of the release of DCAT AP SE version 2 or something. So this is very simply implemented. We have the respec-based specification. We have a mapping table between recommendations that are loaded and just populated into the specification. You could argue that this makes the specification more flexible and not locked in time. So if you would print it, you would have different amount of recommendations for the same release. That would be an argument against this. This is something that I don't really like. On the other hand, the value is well, it's bigger than this negative approach, negative aspect of it. So the same recommendation can be referenced to from multiple properties.
Okay, on the dynamic point, it could be something that the reader can switch on and off. So either they want the fixed version or they want also these live comments, recommendations, notes, whatever it might be. So then we give always the choice to have the fixed version, of course, without the developments in those notes.
I think a positive thing would be to also to collect a lot of recommendations that we have developed over time in an easy accessible manner. That's also something positive. And the challenge, one more challenge is that when things evolve over time, new versions, maybe keep the old recommendations there, just write them deprecated or something. But still have them referenceable when people go back in time if we ever change some recommendation.
Yes. So in addition to this, maybe here there's two parts of it of the thing. One is that this is a combination of making the recommendations machine readable, identifiable with a version management and a persistent RAI in scope of the profile management, because then you could have cross references, etc., to be made as shown here on the screen, and make it more tied to it, and as well have maybe evolution at this smaller building blocks, recommendation building block. So this is maybe something to be added to it. To do today, recommendations are just sections in the profiles. This is just plainly the section in the profile, and you refer to it. We don't have, let's say, a data approach towards the recommendation. So this would be, in my opinion, 26 is a call for a kind of a data approach for the recommendations.
One final note I forgot to add before, that this also gives you the perspective of looking at usage notes from another perspective. Maybe some of the usage notes can be made into recommendations, and therefore also you don't need to repeat yourself in some of the usage notes. You can keep it more tight, the specification.
Okay, so in the chat, Peter Lubrick says that in mobility DCAT AP, the information like this is in an external wiki, and they had good experience with this. So yeah, there is also the need to have recommendations that are updated in a different frequency than the profile itself. Okay, any other comments on this? Okay, so if there is any more feedback, issue number 26 on the DCAT AP reuse guidelines GitHub. And I think we can move on to the next issue. Okay, so this issue is basically saying that currently there is no guidance on how shackle shapes validating the application profiles are designed and implemented. And in the issue, there is an overview of different application profiles that have different ways of actually defining the shackle shapes that validate the data that follows the application profile. And just to illustrate, with DCAT AP itself, there are already two approaches to shackle shapes. One is historic, based on DCAT AP 2, where we have manually created sets of shapes for different targets. So there is shapes that do validate class ranges, shapes that do not validate class ranges, shapes that import background information, for instance, controlled vocabularies, so that it can be checked whether a value is scos in scheme a specific concept scheme, shapes that import other files that import other shapes, and so on. So different shapes baked into the specification created manually. And then the new DCAT AP3 approach, where a file with shackle shapes is generated automatically based on basically the diagram and the same source of truth that we have for the diagram and the machine, generated parts of the application profile, which is the reused classes and properties. And then the expectation is that a user of the shackle shapes can pick which of the shapes they want to use in a specific validation scenario, because there is no situation where we have one set of shackle shapes that satisfy every validation need. That's why historically there were the different sets of shapes. Sometimes you want to validate the ranges, sometimes you do not. And in any case, you need to understand what you are doing when you are validating using shackle shapes, so that you understand the validation errors that you get and know what to do about them, or whether or decide that they are actually okay because they validate something that you intentionally do not have in the data. So those are different approaches in DCAT AP. And also a parallel issue is whether shapes defined in parent profiles should be reused in a way that the shackle shapes in the, let's say, child profiles copy the logic, the validation logic from the parent, and have a separate shape validating the same thing as the parent, or whether there should be a link to the parent shape, basically saying yes, and part of, let's say that's on the right-hand side, part of stud DCAT AP validation, there is a shape from DCAT AP, and we do not recreate the same validation logic also in stud DCAT AP. So those are the issues identified regarding shackle shapes. And now I open the discussion. So any opinions on how shackle shapes should be created? So there are already profiles that do one thing, profiles that do the other thing, and profiles that follow the DCAT AP2 approach, and profiles that follow the DCAT AP3 approach. So the issue is that now we are not consistent, and we do not say anything about that in the reuse guidelines. The question is whether this is fine or whether it is, and we should formulate something about how the shackle shapes should look like. Matthias, yes.
So I think we need to move towards something here. We need to move towards a way of doing shackle shapes. I don't think we could have a perfect suggestion today. We've been working with this initiative InSpec to try to define how to actually build application profiles in shackle and how to reuse them. I can send the link in the chat just to this section where we describe how to use shackle shapes in this way of refining. So it's linking to parent profiles. We're using the shackle and construct to say that we are extending a shackle shape then across application profile barriers. There is a lot of details here. I think we should go for the link approach, but there are details we need to figure out. And I think we are going to have some kind of series of meetings regarding semantic modeling in the autumn, hopefully. And this would be a very good topic to figure out how to do this. So maybe this could be like a direction. We want to go in the direction of doing the links, but we don't know exactly how yet.
Okay, so maybe to give a specific example. So for a data set, the title property is mandatory. Okay, so this is true for DCAT AP. This is true for all the profiles such as stud DCAT AP, GeoDCAT AP. Now the question is, the shape for stud DCAT AP dataset, does it say that the dataset needs to have a title? So it says yes, there is at least one title in the stud DCAT AP shape, or does it not say that and instead link to the DCAT AP dataset shape where this is stated? So that's kind of the difference. So currently in the specifications, we redo all the all the shapes. So it will say in DCAT AP that title is mandatory. It will say again in stud DCAT AP that title is mandatory for a data set in stud DCAT AP. Then we can do a validation on top of that, whether in fact we have the same restrictions expressed in the shackle shapes in DCAT AP and stud DCAT AP to see whether these two are compliant, let's say, or compatible. We do not really do the linking now, that we would say, okay, and everything that is defined for DCAT AP dataset applies to stud DCAT AP. for instance, using the AND approach. Another point to this would be the lifecycle management. So when linking to a different profile, you kind of expect that the other profile is available, does not change, and so on. So you rely on it. Whereas when you have all the Shackle shapes in one place, there is no risk.
There is a couple of things that you need to consider when you do this, when linking across application profiles. For instance, currently the property shapes for a specific like theme, DCAT theme, is not a single property shape, it's multiple property shapes, which makes it harder to link to it across application profiles. So maybe there should be that's what we have suggested, that it should be a single property shape that has a URI that is referenceable, and then is a public property shape that you can point to and extend or refine. When you extend the data set from a geographical perspective, can you point to the entire node shape of the data set in DCAT AP? I would argue no, you cannot. You have to have another node shape, point to the original one and say it refines it, but then point to the individual property shapes you want to reuse, or maybe even have an additional refinement and then do the AND construction to the property shapes. So the mechanism which you reuse also needs some kind of guidance. How do you actually do it? And the best practices for how to express your shackle shapes for allowing this reuse. So I think this is the basis for the other issue. I forgot the number now, where we talked about the structural diff between two profile shapes, the application profiles. If we have this linking, we can do this diffing.
Okay, Bert?
Yeah, so just a question to the audience. I don't know if people around the table here have done this, but is there any party already that tried to reuse the existing DCAT AP shapes beyond kind of in the cherry picking way? Yeah? So it's pointing to the some element into it and trying to reuse on that, and just trying to grab experience rather than just creating it fully on its own site and a copy. Yeah, so that's something different. I really by the linking, the experience of the linking, and or the reuse elements with reuse. Maybe Niels, he just raised his hands.
Yeah, so thanks, Bert. I also wanted to weigh in on a very pragmatic issue here, is that as a maintainer of a profile based on DCAT AP, I don't actually want to define all the properties and be responsible for copy pasting the right files from DCAT AP. I rather just point to it, and I see the comment about security constraints, and that's a valid point, of course, as well. So yeah, it is a complicated issue, and there's pros and cons for every solution, but I think coming to an agreement on a similar approach would really benefit the whole community in working together. That's kind of why I raised the issue.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, you mentioned copy pasting. So you create in your profile the shackle shapes by hand, by writing them, or do you have a tool for that?
We're actually, yes, I say we're copy pasting the shackle files from the base DCAT AP profile, and then we handcraft or AI generate nowadays the the additional DCAT AP NL shapes on top of it.
Okay, thanks. Maria?
Yeah, just my 2 cents for DCAT AP Lu that we used. Unfortunately, the redefine was the easiest because we generate the shackle shapes automatically from the enterprise architect UML diagram. And then the complete redefine was easier than the linking. I don't know how we would do the linking because we start with the UML diagram. That is one. Other one more generally, this is the same problem also with ontology reuse, and there are both good arguments for both options and disadvantages for both options, and they have been struggling with it over 20 years and they still don't know which one is the best option. So yeah, I cannot even from that perspective and those experiences say which one would be the best option to choose. And I think it also partially depends on yeah, how you reuse it. If you have to import the whole thing, or if you have to import a module, or if you only want to reuse 1 or 2 axioms, that also makes a difference whether you want to link or copy paste basically and redefine. So it can't be of much help in this case. You know what the best way would be.
Okay, the original idea why I asked about the copy pasting was that in the end, you basically end up with a set of shackle shapes, and it does not really matter if those are the replicated ones or the linked ones, because you end up with anyway with a set of shackle shapes that you use with your validator. So maybe it's just an issue of tooling, whether there is tooling that will allow you to easily express the same constraints as separate shapes, and the tooling that will anyway collect all the relevant shackle shapes for the validation target, that then it might not be as important to really prescribe a way of doing it. Maybe just some preconditions or some criteria that needs to be satisfiable. Yeah, Matthias?
If we only use it for validation, I agree. But if we also use it for generating like the respec like documentation, where you have an option to see the differences and stuff, then it makes a huge difference in what you can do in that document.
Yep. Then we come to our usual difference on whether a shackle shape is a good definition of an application of a profile or just a validation artifact.
I think here in this is a topic where, let's say, what are kind of minimal criteria that would enable shackle shapes in multiple reuse scenarios of usage scenarios. Some things like the grouping structure or the identification of a property shaped node. So in the current generated of DCAT AP, you have everything is split out and has a unique identifier for every constraint. So it's a very very fine-grained reference to an individual decision and with a unique identifier to it. So it enables this cherry picking and pointing to an individual choice and an element to it, and it has these benefits. One of the reasons is you could make with that a multilingual validation engine easily for Shackle, because if otherwise it becomes a bit more difficult. But on the other hand, if you would then use it for collecting or referring and reusing and linking, it might be a very detailed way and not a very usual level of detail. Maybe there's as well the grouping needs to be referenced as a whole, as a collection of it. So this is the question, maybe on some discussions, and Matthias maybe hinted that this is might be have a deeper note, and we can kind of list what kind of the use cases are and what are then the decisions to make on shackle shapes to facilitate on both cases, or in all cases, maybe something like this to see this better. Because everyone tries to make the best use of the information with its targets, and it will not match all the time, unfortunately.
Maria, do you still want to say something?
No, that's okay. Fine, thank you.
Okay.
You see that Peter had as well commented how he did it with the full import in this case. And that's kind of an expectation need. So if you see the all imports of this one, it means that it has to include all the constraints. So you need a file that includes all the constraints, or a way that would be linked together that it has all the constraints. So just as an illustration that there are certain expectations if you want to do this kind of imports to make this nice and correct.
Or alternatively, you could have a predefined set of targets with a file for each one, and then you would do the same in your profile and import the relevant one. Yeah.
And so we have to cater and support for that. I don't think we have at this moment, that was rather not to be expected here to have firm guidelines to it, but I think we all agree that this deserves with our community some attention and some let's say groundwork, so that we give to all the whole community a better direction forward how to use shackle shapes in the profiling way, as well in the validation way, and how to connect to those and to such challenges on that.
Okay, so this was it for this issue. And with that, I give the floor back to Oscar.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining this session. I think we are at the end and we do not have a lot of time for further discussion, but it was very productive. So thank you, Jacob and Bert, for this. Just a reminder for everyone here. We want to see you to keep interacting on the issues. So the issues that we presented today, but also other issues that we currently also have that we presented at the beginning of the webinar. Feel free to also raise a new issue to trigger a discussion and debate with the community. And then feel free also to share the reuse guidelines. For the upcoming deadlines on our side, we will provide, SEMIC will provide some editorial fixes and some suggestions in the issues. And the presentation will be available on the event page and the recording as well. So please give us a bit of time to process everything, and then everything will be, as usual, available on the SEMIC Support Center. Bert, Jacob, do you agree we do not have time for another question, or?
I think this is indeed the big. I just want to address Matthias' last comment, because that's important. Indeed, the focus and what are, let's say, for the reuse guidelines is only on DCAT AP at the moment. We know that we have touched upon things which are larger. There are other issues that are beyond DCAT AP, but have actually more style guides levels for all specifications, material and of discussion. But it's good to have to take them here in this context for a very concrete case, because it makes the discussion concrete, not so too abstract. And then in the future we might take from these a broader perspective to it. So this is the point. So you have to see the guidelines always in the context they will be existing, so as reach out and then to the beginning when I said on the ETSI work, this is the starting point that readers from the Etsy specification will go to if they start on a new extension, etc., to get more the hands-on guidelines. So this is where it sits. So it's good. I think we identified, we agreed these things, but the focus of the reuse guidelines for DCAT AP stays on DCAT AP and on the, between quotes, newbies in the field to guide them in the first place.
Okay, thank you for this clarification, Bert, and for the question, Matthias, of course. So I wish everyone a good day, and yeah, thank you very much all for attending the webinar, and see you soon. See you very soon.
Thanks for a very good seminar. Bye.